So if you haven't done it quite that way, I want you to promise me right now that if you ever do one of these for somebody, you're going to make sure that the secondary thing says it's the same thing.
Yeah. I think...
Because, okay, the other thing was, they took the exchange rate the day that the thing was issued,
Right.
and we did the average exchange rate, which
Right.
is what everybody does.
Yeah.
So the figures didn't even match.
Yeah. 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 It's a continuing story about the information, right? Which you get from various suppliers and depending what you invest in. I think the problem is more prevalent with folks who own mutual funds.
Well, these were all mutual funds, all AGF funds.
And in these RSPs and so forth, which I think one of the cross-border things to simplify your life is that you perhaps want to rethink the whole aspect of owning mutual funds within the context of these RSPs if you're going across border, because it lays up complications like this, whether it's with AGF and other companies. I mean, AGF isn't certainly the only one.
No, I'm not blaming
this. It just happens to be one, right?
The U.S. Treasury, I told you I was in the Bank of Nova Scotia when Treasury phoned and said, we're going to give you a $25,000 fine a day, $25,000 U.S. fine a day if you, the Bank of Nova Scotia, do not release the details of an account to us, the Department of Treasury in the United States. Yeah. And the Bank of Nova Scotia was an account in the Grand Cayman Islands, has bank secrecy. So they're just, and they're going to fine the bank if they don't do it here, there, or someplace. So people watching are doing this. And Richard, I want to break this thing, we're going to have to break this one in half so we can designate it as an ETF thing somehow. Right, and then we should break it up now for this reporting.
Let me just fill one final point on the ETF thing before we finish off this half segment. I think one of the things that certainly has been proposed and utilized by larger investors in the United States, I haven't seen it used widely here, but one of the things that can be done with ETFs that's kind of interesting to me is what's called tax loss harvesting. Ever heard the term tax loss harvesting?
Well, I think I know what you're going to say, but I want you to tell me.
Okay. Well, for example, if you want to manage your tax profile, say through a tough time like last year, for example, okay. Let's just say that you were in a taxable account and you were invested in the S&P 500.
Yep.
Okay, and you build up some reasonably good capital gains over the years, say 5 years of the prior bull market. And then you get into, and given your other issues in your tax profile, you recognize that you want to realize a capital loss, but you don't want to completely take out your exposure to the investment. So what you can do, say you had an S&P 500 index fund.
Yeah.
You could, and you had a loss in it. You could sell it, trigger the loss. At the same time, purchase not the same,
That's a similar thing,
but a similar thing, replicating your investment exposure almost, not exactly, but close enough.
Yep.
And there was a study done by Barclays, actually, which I saw last year, which said that if you practiced this in a reasonably intelligent manner, you could, the incremental net after-tax returns were something like 12% per annum by actively tax loss harvesting when it was available to you.
Well, makes
not difficult to do. Well, it's not expensive.
Something you can do under U.S. law because of the way the Form 8891 works and so on is you can sell stuff within your RRSP, take a tax loss within your RRSP, then use it against your regular income on the U.S. tax return if you don't claim the exemption of the 8891.
Right.
Because the 8891 is to your advantage. It's not necessarily a disadvantage.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of unique and interesting issues that can be deployed with ETFs, but lots more to talk about. ETFs are here to stay for sure.
They're here to stay, and what you're telling me is that the guys that are in mutual funds only are going to be out to the left pasture.
Theirs is going to be a receding business, I would think. Yeah.
Sunset. Well, I think we're back. Are we back, Richard?
Yes.
We're so informal around here. We've just been having another off-camera discussion with Dan Walkow. Dan is available during the week. He's available if you phone 1-866-541 9952.
That's right.
You got it?
866-541-9952.
Okay. And you can also find his website, which is www.cbank, S-E-A-B-A-N-K, capital, C-A-P-I-T-A-L.com. Correct?
That's right.
And the nice thing you'll find when you go to that place is that as opposed to a few of the other companies that say that they can look after you if you live in the States, etc., you will see that he's got a U.S.-Canadian blended flag there. He is in business to deal with you if you're cross-border, and that is a plug, it's an advertisement, it's an infomercial. Let me tell you that that's important, because I have a client, a lady client that I sent to see Dan, and I'm not going to say what state she lives in, but she doesn't live in Canada. She's a Canadian, and she has a significant portfolio. And the company that Dan mentioned off the air said, oh, well, we'll look after you. And they want to look after her when she comes back to Vancouver, when she's on Canadian soil, when she's actually not even on Canadian soil, on BC soil.
BC soil.
And you just were talking about another one that's down in one of the southern states.
Right.
And you brought up the fact that, first of all, I think that if this company in Canada, well known, but see, nobody wants to lose. If you lose if somebody's got $500,000 portfolio with the typical broker, what does that represent in profits to that broker, just if they're just dealing with it as a broker?
Well, if it's in a mutual funds and so forth, just the expense ratios in the mutual funds themselves, they were saying 2 3/4, almost 3%. So if you have 500,000, you're
$10,000 a year at
least 15,000.
$15,000 is what the broker, manager, mutual fund, whatever person loses if that $500,000 client walks away. Of course they want to do. If 10 of them walk away, it's $100,000, $150,000 a year. But we're just talking about 2 with the same company in that range. And let me tell you that it's scary, because if your fellow goes south and he's in a car accident, what about his wife? What about his kids? Who looks after that account if they're down in Alabama or Missouri or Texas or something?
Well, that's exactly right. Things don't. I think in this cross-border work is that some firms are playing. Well, let's not say they're looking for ways to handle it sort of outside. Skating on thin ice, if you will, in terms of handling.
Totally thin ice.
Because they're not registered in the jurisdiction, they have to continue to provide service under certain conditions. So they've kind of managed to sort of put through processes that not circumvent the rules, but play close to the edge.
Well, everything I've read, and I don't care what anybody else says, I'm just going to give you my opinion, and that's that if you live in Texas or Alaska or Washington State or Florida or something, and you come up to Vancouver and you want to talk to a mutual fund salesman with, I don't care who it is, it could be you want to buy a mutual fund at the Royal Bank of Canada or the Bank of Montreal or RBC or anybody, in my opinion, this is David Ingram, this isn't Dan talking here, this is me, and I've written all sorts of newsletters on this. It is illegal for that person to talk to you, even if you're on Canadian soil, because you're not a resident of Canada.
Right.
That's my opinion. That's what I've been told by securities commissions and all sorts of people, that it doesn't matter if you're on Canadian soil. It doesn't matter if you're using your mother's address or your father's address or your brother's address or your second cousin twice removed. You have to be a resident of Canada if you want to deal with a Canadian stockbroker, if that Canadian stockbroker is not licensed with the SEC in the States.
Yeah. Well, what I guess amazes me, and we've talked about this over time, is firms continue to do business in some cases on a cross-border basis. And they handle it in different ways, but more and more as they come across, obviously as we expand our business, we see more and more, I wouldn't say, not infractions, but kind of loose practices.
Well, I consider them infractions. I say they are.
I'm not one to throw stones at any of them, but